Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Some people get stressed during the holidays or leading up to the holidays, while other people get stressed when you flip the calendar to that new year. And that's why I wanted to talk today with Dr. Jenifer Dragonette, our resident therapist expert, about this pervasive issue of anxiety, particularly during the start of a new year. Dr. Jen highlights the physical manifestations of anxiety, the importance of understanding its nature, and the role of mindset in managing these anxious thoughts we have. During our conversation, she emphasizes this concept of agency, the need for connection, and the power of communication in overcoming these feelings of isolation, and in particularly fear. Through personal anecdotes and professional insights, we try to provide you with strategies to cope with some of these anxieties that you may be feeling. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jenifer Dragonette. Dr. Jen, welcome back for, I think, another hopefully riveting conversation as we always have.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
So today we're recording this in December, and so this show will probably come out in January. But the topic that I wanted to talk about today, or we wanted to talk about today, was anxiety. Like, I think it's everybody's favorite word around the holiday, and then especially like when you pair it with this presidential election that we went through. I think it's something that I think is really heart and center of how we're living our lives. And I think one thing, I was just thinking about this, I overheard somebody saying it, and maybe it was, not to throw Teresa under the bus, but maybe it was her she's the one that said this to me. It was, I just want to survive the holidays. And that made me really pause and step back. I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense. Like the holidays are supposed to be, a time to have fun, enjoy it with family and friends. But we both know they can become really stressful. And so how do we deal with anxiety around this time of year? And especially as we, I think, enter a new year as well, because New Year's always, sometimes, I guess it depends on your mindset. You have this mindset of being opportunistic, as seeing like a new beginning, a fresh start. And I know there's other people that see just the opposite, that they feel that anxiety about the unknown of what this next year could be like for them.
I think you really put your finger on it when you said that a lot of this has to do with our mindset. And, this is a time of year, as you said, we're recording this in December. It's going to come out in January. This is often the time of year that I see a lot of folks coming into my practice for things like anxiety, family conflict, kind of existential challenges. What is the purpose of my life? And a lot of this is really our mindset. So I like to start by helping people understand, what is anxiety? What are we even talking about when we say I'm feeling anxious or I have anxiety? A lot of this is, like we talked about in other podcasts, being able to pull back from the thoughts and look at what the thoughts are actually saying to us when we're having anxiety type thoughts. So
information is data, right?
Information is data.
Or emotion is information.
Yeah, right. Feelings are just information. And what are these feelings trying to tell us? So, the first thing I like to say about anxiety is it's very physical. We feel it in our body a lot of the time. So when we feel anxious, often that's our first cue, is that kind of gut punch feeling, or we might feel it in our face or feel kind of a tingling or like a prickly sensation. And that's our body and our nervous system telling us that something is happening that we want to pay attention to. But if we don't notice that, we can just go about our day and feel kind of off, feel a little bit nervous or just unsettled, and not recognize that we're having all of these anxiety thoughts that are getting in our way. So anxiety typically tries to convince us of three things. And I really do like to almost anthropomorphize anxiety, like it's this external thing that's happening to us. So anxiety tries to convince us that the feared thing, whatever it is we're afraid of, and this is really true for any type of anxiety, it convinces us that the feared thing is definitely going to happen. Not maybe, not probably, but definitely going to happen. It convinces us that it's going to be catastrophic when it does happen. And it convinces us that we won't be able to cope with it. And those three things are really important to understand, because it means that we can intervene in any of those three ways, right? If we understand that anxiety is trying to convince us that something bad is definitely going to happen, if we can pull back from that thought, we can interrogate it a little bit. Is it definitely going to happen? Do we know for sure that I won't be able to handle that visit with my in-laws, right? Or that I won't be able to make it through the holidays? And then we can move on to the second one. Is it going to be catastrophic, right? Because that is really where our mind goes, like, this is terrible. It's going to be awful. And then that third piece, I won't be able to cope with it. And that's where I often find that we have the most agency. I know that's a word that we talk about a lot, is agency.
Yes.
And we have agency over our ability to cope with things. We can build up resources internally. We can reach out for support from other people. So it gives us a lot of doorways in to address those anxious thoughts and feelings when they're coming at us.
In listening to you talk about that, I think back to people that go through a career transition, one that is not their own, where they're either laid off, let go, whatever the situation may be. It's really hard. It's a difficult situation to go through. I've been on both sides of that fence in my corporate career, but I found that it's even more challenging this time of year, whether it's a November or December or January, because you feel like what you just described, that it's catastrophic. I'm never going to find another job. No one's hiring this time of year. And you can go down this death spiral of anxiety, fear. And I remember I've worked with families going through this time of year. I actually went through this one time during my corporate career this time of year. And I remember that Christmas, and I'll never, I still get emotionally choked up about it, because my kids were little, like my triplets were maybe like 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I lost my Christmas that year with my kids because of that. And I'll never forgive myself for that, because here you talk about agency. Like, I had the power to be able to control, my thoughts and my emotions, my mindset. And I let the fear and the anxiety take over. And it's that scene from Inside Out 2. I don't know if you've seen it. I think we talked about on the show, where anxiety is just sitting there at the control panel, clutched, fist, hands to the control panel, and this tornado is spinning all around her, and Joy is trying to come in to get her to let go. And I remember, even I'm getting choked about this damn movie. I remember looking over at Teresa and crying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, how do you deal with that? Because you like you just said, you feel it physically and you feel it emotionally too.
Right. I agree. And I had that same reaction to that same scene because it is so human, right? That is what it feels like. That anxiety comes in. It's like, let me take care of this, right? I will control this for you. And it feels comforting internally, again, as though anxiety is this external thing, right? It feels comforting in that moment because it's like, okay, somebody's in charge, right? The anxiety will take over. But the problem is that all of these feelings love themselves. They want to stick around. So when anxiety is coming in and trying to control us in that way and control the situation and make sure it goes the way we want it to, we're essentially feeding into that narrative. Like, it is going to happen. The feared thing is going to happen. My family won't be okay. It's going to be catastrophic and we won't be able to cope with it. So I think you're identifying exactly part of that process is noticing what that tornado feels like, right? If we're in, the anxiety's got the controls and we're in this tornado and none of the other emotions come in, what does that feel like in our body, right? What are the signs that that's happening to us? Because we actually can stop it, but not if we're in the middle of that storm, right? It's really, really hard to step outside of it when we're so swept up in those emotions. So being aware of those first sensations, oh, wow, this is anxiety. Right? This isn't necessarily facts, right? You didn't ruin your kid's Christmas that year, right? You had wonderful Christmases since then and you had wonderful times with your family. But that's what anxiety says is you can never forgive yourself for that, right? Carry this with you so that you don't ever go into those situations like that again. And it really doesn't ever let us off the hook for just being human. So I like to almost have a conversation with anxiety and say, I know you're trying to tell me this. Right? Let's walk through this. Sometimes with my clients or with myself, I'm like, let's just play it out, right? Let's take that first piece. Do we know for sure that Christmas is ruined? Right? Even if it is, do we know for sure that something catastrophic is going to happen? Let's look back over the course of your life and see what are the other times that you felt this way? What actually happened, right? So some kind of cognitive behavioral therapy there of let's hold up the facts, right? It makes sense that you feel this way. And we don't want to invalidate that and say, why is this, you're so stupid for feeling this way because we're just humans. We do. But it makes sense that you feel this way. And what do the facts tell us? What do we know? Who's in our corner? How can we cope with this? Who can help us cope through this? And really pulling in on your internal resources. There's a quote I think of a lot with this piece. It comes from researchers Sokol and Fox. They've done a lot of research on anxiety, and they say, without self-doubt, anxiety cannot exist. And I really
say that one more time.
Without self-doubt, anxiety cannot exist. It's an interesting
really
one.
Yeah. That's why I wanted you to say that. I'm like, I need to let that soak in.
Yeah, I did too. The first time I read that, the first 10 times I read that, without self-doubt. Because what that says is anxiety is something that I actually have some agency with. It's about building up mastery or understanding that I do have the skills to make it through, or I've made it through every hard day of my life so far. I can do really hard things. I can handle challenges. We can, right? We're still here. We're still standing. But anxiety tries to convince us that we can't. And so we really have to be able to pull back and look at the facts, look at our internal resources, and then maybe add additional resources, ask for help, share out loud what's happening. Because that's the other thing that anxiety convinces us of is that we're alone. We're the only people who felt this way, or this is worse for us than other people. And that's really part of the fundamental problem with being human is we know our internal experience so well, and we know what other people choose to share with us. And what other people choose to share with us is not the entirety of their experience. Unless you're in my field and we get to hear all of the nitty-gritty details of somebody's anxiety process, most of us walk around as though we are fine, in quotes. And so we get this image that I'm the only person in the world who feels this way. And it's so isolating and it's so fundamentally untrue.
Before we hit record, we were talking about this. What you just touched on is like, I have so much respect for the work that you do as a therapist and all therapists do, because here you are in your chosen profession that you're meeting with your clients, your families that you work with, and having to deal and work with them through their issues. And at the same time, we're human too. And we all have our set of own issues. And I think I mentioned to you, like the families that I know that I work with personally, I know they really love and care about me because they're the ones that ask, well, how are you doing? And that's always so gratifying. And it helps, again, take down that level of anxiety, knowing that, the work that we do from a financial planning standpoint or a mental health standpoint is really, it helps change lives. And that's one of the things I think that personally I've tried to come around to grips with is saying that out loud, kind of what you just mentioned, is that, I think most people, I think we've talked about this before. I know I've talked about on the show with others, is that the stereotype of mental wellness, or like even what a financial planner does. And I think what people find is once they get into the process or have conversations with an advisor or a therapist, it's not what they thought it was going to be, and it's not as scary, and there's more, here's the word again, agency. They have more control over their lives than they initially thought.
Exactly. And you're touching upon two really important points there, probably more than two, but two that I'm going to pull out for a second. One is the idea of avoidance, because that's how anxiety is maintained. So, it convinces us of those three things. Something bad's definitely going to happen. It's going to be catastrophic when it does, and we can't cope with it. And then we avoid that thing, whether it's a conversation, whether it's, a phobia that we have of something, whether it's social anxiety, which really comes up around the holidays. And so we avoid it because our brain tells us that's too scary, right? It's going to be catastrophic. We can't cope with it. So just don't go to the holiday party, or just don't acknowledge to your spouse that you're feeling anxious, or just don't get on the plane because you have a phobia of flying, right? And the problem with that is that it works in the short term, right? We avoid the thing and then we don't feel the anxiety related to the thing. But the problem is that we get convinced that we didn't feel anxious because we didn't do the thing. And so in order to avoid that anxiety feeling, because anxiety is very uncomfortable, we just continue to avoid. And that really grounds in and reinforces that negative cycle. So we feel like we can't do the thing because it's going to bring up the anxiety. So the corollary, or the kind of antidote to this, is we have to actually start to be willing to approach the thing that brings anxiety. And that is scary, right? Because we're basically saying, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to test those hypotheses that maybe it's not going to definitely happen, the bad things, maybe it's not going to be catastrophic. Maybe I can cope with it. And often we have to do that behaviorally, walk toward the feared thing, conversation, event, whatever, kind of fake it till you make it a little bit. And I don't always love that phrase, but that is the work with anxiety is to say, I'm going to approach this thing anyway. See what happens, almost like a scientist, and really try that on. Is that true that it's definitely going to be bad? Is that true that it's definitely going to be catastrophic? Is it true that I can't cope with it? We won't know unless we try it. And I thought of this because you were saying maybe we just say the thing out loud, right? Maybe we just share that fear, that self-doubt. That's one of the things that I see the most in my practice and as a human, is sometimes conversations are the thing that we fear the most. Right? Just that discomfort of saying to someone, I'm really struggling, or I don't want to spend that much time with you, or whatever it is that we're trying to set some boundaries around. That's the thing that's bringing up the fear. And just like you said, 9 times out of 10, maybe even more, it's fine. In fact, it humanizes us. It brings people closer to us because we've got this whole internal narrative that I'm the only one who's struggling with these thoughts and feelings. And lo and behold, Paul just said to me, he's got them too. So wow, right? I have to really check those assumptions. And now I see you differently. I feel closer to you because you are also somebody who experiences these thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I think, in listening to you talk about that, like when it's, and I kind of lead with this when I meet a new family for the first time, and I basically tell them, it's not lost on me, the fear or anxiety, trepidation you may have in coming into my office and having a conversation with, a complete stranger, even if they're referred from another family or a friend that I work with, is trying to take the temperature of the room down to let them feel comfortable and confident that this is a place that you can, share things openly. It's conversation between you and I, and just to try to take those walls down. And I've found over time and trying to do this, and maybe I learned this from my own therapist, and how to do this, hopefully, shout out to Kelly, is to get them to a point where, again, they feel comfortable talking about something that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you see that, like you deal with that every day being a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I liken it to those old sitcoms where, somebody thinks that everybody's forgotten their birthday, but really they're planning a surprise party and you're yelling at the screen like, just tell them because there's so much pain happening here, right? I think that we just walk around like that. I work with so many people who feel so alone in their anxiety or so alone in their depression or their thoughts. And the one thing that would be the most helpful is for them to actually say out loud to their friends or loved ones, I'm really struggling, because then they would hear, oh my gosh, I am too. And it's like I'm shouting at the screen, like, just acknowledge what's happening, right? Because you're walking around with so much pain, feeling so other, so alien, and that's making it feel so much worse. So then we continue that avoidance process and we don't have the type of agency that we really need and deserve to have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you come back to that whole avoidance where it's like no one really wants to, well, I'm sure there are some people, but I think most people generally are good people that they don't want to deliver bad news to somebody. And so, we can work this up in our minds of this potential negative conversation with somebody. And actually, this just happened to a friend of mine a few days ago where, I tried to convince him, like, you have to have this conversation, or you shouldn't have to, but you should have this conversation. You should deliver this news, because if you were on the opposite end, you would want to know as well.
Yeah.
And so again, to your point, we build up this avoidance to where we think we're delivering potentially bad news. And while it may be difficult news to hear, it's probably not as bad as we think it is.
Yes. And that brings me to the
then
other.
How do we overcome that? That's the
Yes.
That's the itch to scratch there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. That's the second point that I really heard in what you said a minute ago that I wanted to highlight. And it kind of is a bit of a teaser for our next conversation next month, which is that when we feel that anxiety, when we feel that kind of out of control feeling, and control is an important word that I'm going to come back to, we often try to exert control, but we don't realize we're doing that. And so what that looks like, and this is a made up word that I created a while ago, actually one of my children created. So I'll share that story with you in a second. But we start to engage in what I call make-suring. And so the story that I often share with my clients is, as you know, I'm a parent too. And when my children were little, I came into the room one day and my child, who was at the time about 1 year old, was doing that kind of wobbly baby standing up, kind of about to take a step, but maybe about to fall kind of walk. And his older brother, who was about 3, was just dancing in circles around him, kind of like with his hands up. And I said, buddy, what are you doing? And he said, I'm make-suring he doesn't fall down.
Oh, man.
Right? And I thought, that is the perfect word for what we do. We have no control, right? That 3-year-old had no control as to whether his 1-year-old brother was going to fall down. If he's going to fall, he's going to fall. But we just dance around situations, trying to control them. It's like this frantic effort to control things that aren't ours to control. And so when I talk with people about that, it's a concept that I think of all the time. I just want to make sure we start listening for these words. And I encourage all of our listeners to start noticing, I just want to make sure you didn't forget our appointment. I just want to make sure you're okay. I want to make sure you know how important it is that you do this thing. And we start to try to control, right? So we're that anxiety in the tornado, trying to control all of these things that aren't ours to control. We can't control how somebody feels when we say something to them. We can control, how much we share. We can control the tone of our voice and how kindly we deliver something, but then it's theirs to experience. And so a lot of that anxiety and a lot of that avoidance comes out as this kind of controlling, usually very well-intended behavior, but we're still in it. We're still trying to maintain that control. We're trying to kind of calm that anxiety chaos. And it usually backfires because we're giving more than we have to give, or we're trying to get into somebody else's process. And invariably it doesn't work. And then we feel resentful and disconnected. So the very thing we were trying to avoid happens, and we kind of make it happen.
That's really interesting. So now I can see like how this tied into our last conversation and why you wanted to go there. So, but I really appreciate your flexibility in bringing up this anxiety, because I think as we're in this time of year, and with the election cycle just finishing and pent up anxiety around that, it's going to be an interesting 2025 as we get started here. So we'll make sure that we pull on that thread when we meet in the new year. But Dr. Jen, thank you so much for all these conversations this past year and for being a part of the show. And I know that I personally get so much out of our conversation. I know the listeners do as well, as far as the valuable feedback that I get regarding our conversation. So I can't thank you enough. And I hope that the new year is low in anxiety and provides a lot more interesting conversations with us. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate our conversations too. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I think the point I want to make in my conversation with Dr. Jen are the coping skills that she laid out that everybody can use. They're easily available, and as she mentions, highly suggest building these tools and skills to have in your arsenal when these thoughts of anxiety and fear start to bombard you. One of the first ones she mentioned was mindfulness and meditation. And I know this gets maybe a bad rap, a little hokey, if you will. But techniques like deep breathing exercises can really be helpful and ground you in the present moment. I know I've worked with this a lot with the therapists I work with over the years. And the hardest part is realizing you're in the moment when you need to do the deep breathing. So in order to get ahead of that, a lot of people recommend doing that to start your day, basically clearing your mind. The next point is physical activity. I think this goes without saying, but regular exercise can help reduce anxiety. There's a physical aspect to it and a mindset aspect to it. And I know that we're at the start of a new year, and everybody, as I talked with Dr. Taryn Clark last week about goals and objectives versus resolutions, a lot of people are wanting to get physically fit and getting back in the gym or whatnot. It's not about the motivation to stay with that. It's building these tiny habits to ensure that you're going to keep doing it on a consistent basis. But physical exercise, definitely a helpful component to helping reduce anxiety. And the last one that Dr. Jen brought up was seeking social support. Having a group of friends or family or even a therapist that can provide that help and support that you need in order to kind of feel relief and reduce these feelings of fear, isolation, or anxiety, whatever they may be. So with those three things, mindfulness, physical activity, and social support, I'll wrap it up for this week, and we'll see you next time. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.